Hey, Talent Warriors, welcome to another episode of the Talent War podcast where we talk about all things talent. And today we're going to tackle an absolute critical topic. And we have such a great guest. And he even counseled me, so I made sure that I pronounce his name correctly. And says if I do it correctly, then I'm going to be very well respected by the Haitian population, which is a group that I'm quite fond of. But Yvan Demosthenes. And so stand by for great advice on how he just achieved this magnificent career and has really been making an impact in talent, specifically with the person. Well, hey, brother, welcome to the show. I probably didn't get it exactly right, but I'll give it a shot sometime later. But thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, George, and your audience should know, and I don't know if we have the opportunity, but little did I know that you are already very well entrenched in the Haitian community long before us getting together. Might not be too far to say that there are people carrying your name, your namesake, because of the wonderful work that you've done within the Haitian community. So on behalf of my fellow countrymen, thank you so much.
I love that. I will tell you that unfortunately, being a white guy of Irish descent, I was invited to many, many meals of some amazing food. But I had to recalibrate what the word hot and spicy meant. Delicious food, and you don't want to be insulting. But there were some things they made for me where I was like, I swear to God, I thought my head was a volcano. That was some seriously great food, but lost all feeling from my shoulders up. It was crazy.
Oh, nice. Nice. I'm jealous, actually. You know, one thing I love about hot food, there is a euphoric experience when you have some hot food that may be over your level of threshold, right? Past your threshold, it could be definitely euphoric.
And then I play soccer a lot, and I have a couple guys from Nigeria and the Ivory Coast that are amazing strikers and footballers. And then they brought me food, and I said, well, I've had some Haitian spicy food. And I just meant it as a compliment. And I'm thinking, I did not mean that as a challenge. And I went through this whole torture session again because they're like, oh, no. I don't know what they did, but it was their great satisfaction to put me to the test and see how much I could tolerate. And I think I sweated more eating the food than I did out on the soccer pitch. So
yeah, you're a great man, George.
Hey, so I went through your bio. It's kind of impossible for me to ever do it justice. And you and I both know what we put up on LinkedIn is kind of, all right, here's the broad brush strokes. But tell us about your career and bring us up to speed, because I know you got your own gig now. And then we'll kind of dig into some of those questions as we go along.
Yeah, so born in Haiti, fast forward through my parents coming to America, living in New York the first 10 years of my life, then moving to, of all places, Lima, Ohio, which is not only the antithesis of New York, but those that know Lima will tell you that it is truly the center of the universe. All things revolve around Lima. And if you don't know, it's just because you don't know yet. I'm here to tell you. It's fascinating. Yeah, that's because most New Yorkers have never been to Lima, Ohio. But when you go to Lima, after being in Lima, you realize there's no corner of the world or universe where there's not some connection to Lima, Ohio. It's one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen in my whole life. So been here in Cincinnati on and off since I started school at the University of Cincinnati with the phenomenal Bearcats. We just had a great...
Wait a minute. I knew you would do the Bearcats, but wait a minute. Joe Burrows just embarrassed my Chiefs and interrupted their path to the Super Bowl. So I did forget. We have to put Bengals talk off limits because I just don't know, but I'll be able to contain myself.
Well, not a problem. I will say I wouldn't say that Joe embarrassed your Chiefs. Joe's a great guy, and the Chiefs have a strong team. Mahomes is phenomenal. I think this was probably the best series of playoff games in the NFL that I've ever seen and witnessed. So it's two Titans going at it. It was a joy and pleasure to watch. So
yeah, it's going to be that way of years to come.
Hopefully that bodes well for the future. It's going to be
that way for years to come, those two. And I kind of like that. But all right, tell us about the Bearcats. I interrupted you.
So, University of Cincinnati Bearcats. Love my Bearcats. And I got myself into the arena of sales after college. And shortly after experiencing some great things in the IT industry on enterprise level, I went and got my MBA. And as chance would have it, a friend introduced me to the manager at Career Builder. And that was around 2005, I believe. Sometimes I get the dates blurred. 18 years ago. And got into the space of human capital. And George, if you remember, Y2K was still really fresh in people's minds. The end of the world didn't come like we all thought. Clearly, Prince was right because we partied like it was 1999 and woke up the next day.
Do you know how many people that are listening to this podcast that probably don't know that song? I appreciate the reference, but I always worry that I'm going to crack something.
And I don't believe you. Everybody knows that song. It's not, it can't possibly be
like
true.
To think.
Can't possibly be true. Yeah. Well, keep my fingers crossed. Hopefully I'm right. But yeah, it was an interesting time because corporate America was embarking on a new age. People in HR were using email for the first time. And they were also creating something that had never been before on this brand new thing called the internet. And these websites had career sites where you can actually put your jobs on a career site. And it was interesting to say the least. A lot of these talent acquisition specialists and leaders, they thought all their problems were solved. They thought they would never have to struggle to attract talent ever again. And teaching them how to integrate from their career site to these job boards to their applicant tracking system. I've got a funny story to share with you, which some people may think is funny or not true, but it really did happen. One client, we would consult a lot, and one client literally had so many questions on their applicant tracking system once someone hit apply that we actually printed out the questions and we could roll the questions across the room for so many questions. And it was not uncommon for companies, their first question when you hit the apply button was, what is your social security number? And so there was a lot of consulting. The internet was new. It was a great place. And Career Builder really showed me a lot. It was a great sales environment. It really did a great job in rewarding sales success and creating an environment and culture where even the receptionist was responsible for helping with sales. If person with my position as a salesperson, if I went to the receptionist and asked for help with that, she had to drop everything that she was doing to assist me with a sale. The sales were king. Yeah, so 2005 is when I got into the space.
But you were more on the sales side. When did you did you have that light bulb go off in your head and say, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and let my dominant masochistic gene come out and get into talent. And I say that because I joke that anybody that's been in the talent space, the HR, talent acquisition, if you take the 23andMe test, there's a dominant gene in there that says, I just love to be tortured. And for some reason, bizarrely, we thrive in it. But when did you have kind of that light bulb moment where it was kind of like, you know what, all right, I like the sales. And there's that human dynamic I see in there. And, you know, being able to read people, work with people, build relationships. Yeah. But when did it turn for you where it's like, you know what, acquiring talent is probably, you know, I need to make a shift? What was that about for you?
So I think it happened in two different ways. So the light bulb went off years ago, George. The opportunity for me to go out on my own happened more recently, but it occurred to me years ago when I was doing my sales and I'm getting phone calls from staffing companies to post and to do the same things that their clients were doing. They just turn around and do the same thing, but they have a different approach. And then I would consult them just as if I were consulting a Fortune 500 company. As a matter of fact, Career Builder, Monster, and Hot Jobs, they would have separate divisions that only catered to staffing companies. Whether you were a boutique firm, a one-man shop, or if you were a Manpower, right? They had a specific unit that supported efforts by these staffing companies to attract talent using their platform. And so that light bulb went off on me, frankly, quite early. As a matter of fact, there's a company here in Cincinnati, at one time, one of the fastest growing IT companies in the country. They were the fastest growing company on the NASDAQ, called Pomeroy IT Solutions. And part of their company, they had an IT staffing division. And again, that was one of my clients where I served them as an enterprise organization, but then I would also help their staffing division and consult with them. So most of that kind of settled with me and percolated with me for quite some time. But I will say that light bulb went off years ago. And then taking that into consideration really provided me with confidence to kind of delve into this, because I'd helped staffing companies before when they had pains with a specific role or an industry, or they wanted to create more pipeline one way or the other. They would come to me and ask for my advice, and then they'd go back to the client and share what I had consulted on them with. So,
yeah, I've been in the space a long time. So there's some meat, because I want to talk about the diversity issues, because I have some pretty strong views on those. And I think there's a lot to talk about. But if you were to look back on those early days when you were helping people, this might be a bit of a hard question. You may need some time to think about, but what were they getting wrong in your estimate? And do you still see some of those kind of tendencies or that mindset today about how people view talent and go after it?
Yeah, interesting, George. You know, there's some nuances between when I started and what I see now. Let me actually start with what they were doing right. And one of the things that they were doing right as a whole is that when you went into an organization, if you talk to them, there was really no amount of money or no limitation of what they would invest to attract people. And if they thought postings worked, then they would post on Career Builder, Monster, Hot Jobs, and anywhere else to make sure that they got all the candidates that they needed and wanted and created that pipeline. Today is a little different. They're trying to have more of a magic bullet type approach, right? Let's put all of our efforts in one bucket and forget about the other areas. Let's be precise rather than trying to cover as much space. And there used to be an approach where they would try to consider how many duplicate replications of candidates they used to get. There's really no more talk of that, because they're trying this magic bullet approach. But what's happening, they're missing out on so many other potential candidates. And I think that makes diversity even more important, because people have different experiences, and part of their experiences, they go about things differently. There's a lot of people out there that never take themselves to a job board. Their online experiences are different than other people's online experiences. They go and they network and connect and express interest at other places where other people might go to one single place to express interest to a job or search for a job all the time, right? So it becomes even more important. Second thing I would say that they were getting wrong is, again, with the technology was still pretty new. At that time, not everybody had a computer at home. A lot of TA leaders just didn't think that the internet was here to stay. And it sounds crazy, but it's true, right? There was a lot of resistance to that.
The things that we thought when we were younger.
Yeah.
When we were younger, the things that we thought, and now we realize how short-sighted we were.
Yeah, exactly. And think about it. The resistance was great, so much that I think there were a segment of our corporate leaders that were really just covering their tails and putting a little bit of investment into the internet just in case they were wrong. But there wasn't a full commitment. And I will share with you, I drove to Columbus to meet with a client. And I forget exactly what happened, but I may have had another appointment with another client that day, or whatever it was. It took me to the library because I had to go to the library and just settle in there and maybe catch up on some work, or wait, or rather than waiting in a parking lot when it was blazing hot out, sit in the library, catch up on some work, maybe read a book, whatever. So on this particular day, I was there and there were people standing in line with their resumes, waiting to get a computer so they could download their resume. And I was listening to all these conversations. They're going up to the librarian asking how they can scan their floppy disk or how they can transmit this. And the next meeting came and they heard my pitch, but they resisted. They were like, I just don't think people are going on the internet or they're going to go on to Career Builder to apply to a job. We don't want to do it. I'm like, I told them, hey, I just came from the library and you are absolutely wrong. Do me a favor, do yourself a favor, go to the library and watch what's happening. And I shared my story with them. And 2 days later, we were able to sign an agreement and get them on board. But again, that resistance there, it seems kind of silly. I've seen this happen with technology on a whole bunch of different levels, which is a whole different conversation. I think a lot of that resistance also has to do not just with uncertainty, but with adopting something new. And that adoption to bring in a career builder or whatever, or a firm to help you with your recruiting and maybe consult, all those things, you have to adopt that and bring it in and be open to it. And I think a lot of that resistance has to do with that as well.
This episode is sponsored by Talent War Group, a management consulting and executive search firm. We help you attract, retain, and develop your top talent because we know that the most valuable asset within your organization is your talent. With services like leadership development, talent acquisition and HR consulting, executive search, executive coaching, and keynote speeches, we work with you to create talent solutions to your most pressing business problems. You can get started by finding us at talentwargroup.com and let us help you develop your next generation of leaders. Also, if you like what we're doing here at the podcast, please leave a review as it helps us support and continue this podcast. It helps us support people who are really dedicated to improving their business skills and excelling above all else. You and I grew up in the age where, there wasn't LinkedIn, you were faxing, you were connecting, you were doing a lot of these things. And to your point, people didn't want to adopt those technologies. And it's so interesting to me because I've been the head of talent acquisition for a number of companies. And the pendulum swung so far to the other side that there's absolutely no shortage of apps, of software programs, new applicant tracking systems, new CRMs, things that will create these better talent pools, the AI. And I remember my last gig as the VP of talent acquisition and merely sorting through and making sense of the options, even before you got to cost. It is a million miles away from where you and I started now. Completely opposite perspective. Now it's like, how do you sort through and go, it's worth my time to look at this. It's worth the ROI because people are developing apps so fast. But you and I could probably go down a bad rabbit hole with that. But I wanted to ask you because you eventually transitioned into diversity. And so one of the things I don't know that it's a bias more than a definition or a description of the context of my world. I grew up in the military. I mean, to pay for my education, I enlisted, then I became an officer. And I think we had one African-American kid in a graduating class of 600 in my high school. So I didn't know anything. And then when I went into the military, it's really what shaped me. And really what we cared about is the person to your left, right, front, and back. Do they have your back? Do they shoot straight? Are they a good person? So it was like diversity is an issue never, ever entered into my mind. And so me transitioning into talent acquisition, I was always like, okay, look, I want to know they're a good person. I want to know that they shoot straight, accomplish the mission. I want to do all of those things. And that doesn't undo people that didn't have my background. I came to learn that very, very quickly. No matter what I did, it doesn't undo the other people who are making hiring decisions. But I would say in the last 4 or 5 years, you've seen this real strong, heavy, focused drive. Like if you don't have a dedicated, committed, well-funded diversity program or part of your human capital function, you're way behind the times. But how did you make the jump from simple talent to what I can make a bigger impact here, educating, impacting companies by teaching them about diversity, equity, inclusion, and all the things that come with that? I mean, what was it about you that just said, you know what, I got to go do this because this is of value to me and everybody?
Yeah, George, I think similar to you on the other side, I've kind of been that person where I was the one sticking out in the room, right? When we lived in New York, my neighborhood was literally like a United Nations. Every house had a story and a country of origin or a different background. It was killer. We'd all come out in the street, we'd play, we'd go back home and do it all over again the next day. And then we'd go to school and everybody had different backgrounds as well. We were all different. And then going to the Midwest, things weren't quite the same, right? It was literally black or white.
I caught you. You were about to say it was a little different, and if you uttered those words, I was going to challenge.
Yeah, yeah, I was. Yeah,
a little different.
It was, yeah, a little different, black and white. So that's always been part of me. And to your question, how did I get into diversity? So I tell the story, which I've shared often. My manager at the time, whose name is Steve Million, I'll share his name so everybody can give him a call and send him a note. But I walked out of a meeting with him and he's like this quiet genius, Steve Million, right? He's a bit unassuming, but like this guy, he's sharp. And so I always, even to this day, value his opinion on things. And we walked out of this meeting, and before we get to the car, he's like, "You're the only one in the office that ever talks about diversity." And, I looked at him because I was really the only person of color, to my knowledge, in the entire building, let alone our office. So I looked at him, and talking, he said to me that based on my knowledge and my enthusiasm, I like to say enthusiasm for diversity, and he wanted me to take on the role of being the diversity leader and diversity consultant for our region. So literally overnight, I went from handling my book of business to being involved in the whole office's book of business. So any client, any government agency, any meeting that involved diversity, they would come to me and I would join them on those calls. If there was any research going on, there was a lot of things going on with OFCCP at the time. They were starting to figure.
I need to make a note to my editors, delete that acronym off. That is, I will suffer.
Yeah, I know it's
PTSD from OFCCP.
PTSD.
I'm not even allowed to talk to auditors. Remind me, I got into a pissing contest with an auditor from OFCCP.
Well, I wish we would have known each other. I would have helped you.
No, the only thing you would have.
Yeah, I wish we would have known each other then. I would have helped you.
The only thing you could have helped me with was bail money, because I literally told the guy the only thing beating you to the hospital is the headlights of the ambulance your ass is riding in. You know what? I'm going to tell the story so that way people aren't. I had created a veterans program at a consulting firm, and it was the first of its kind. And so they come in and they do the OFCCP audit. And look, I don't want to certainly knock an entire government function, but he was an auditor. He had a clip-on tie. I mean, I put on my best show. I said, hey, here's what we're doing. We're helping veterans. We're bringing them into corporations where they wouldn't previously have had a shot or been recognized. We're doing boot camps to assimilate them. We've got these employee resource groups. And at the time, he said, well, how come you're not hiring wounded veterans? And I said, well, we have. And he says, well, I want to know how many wounded or disabled veterans you're covering in your talent pool. And I said, well, we can't ask. At that time, it was even more strict about asking for anybody's disabilities. Of course, now you ask, do you need any accommodation? And he said, you're not doing enough. And I said, listen, Slick, I started this program 5 months ago, and I've hired 250 veterans that wouldn't have had opportunities in a Big Five consulting firm. We're finding our way. And if you have some suggestions here, and he says, well, I have to mark down fail on this part. I said, if you write fail on that after all we've done, they're going to kill the program and no vets are going to get hired here. I said, how about you just help me do this better? And he was a complete ass. And I said, you know what? You need to take your little clipboard. You need to walk your happy ass away. You and I are not going to get along. When you're doing something right and doing something for the right reasons with great results. I had a great tip that somebody gave me, which is find a way to make it better. Whatever your suggestions are, add to it. Make it more powerful. And this guy was the exact opposite. So anyway, after that, my managing director said, George, you are no longer allowed. When OFCCP is in the building, you will be taking PT.
I love it. Well, that frustration, I was lucky enough, George, because, when I used to talk to clients and mention diversity, it was kind of a no-brainer for me, because if Career Builder had their platform, and as successful as it was, they had a second component that you could add to what you were already doing or sell in addition to. If they understood that, then why not? And remember, I told you that companies used to want to spend whatever they could to get as many people into their pipeline as possible. So the company who's providing you all this traffic, they understand that there's another pipeline that they can tap into on your behalf. So where I came from, wanting to do the best for my clients, wanting them to understand the opportunity out there, why leave so many potential candidates on the table. And then when I became that, my OFCCP story, I don't want you to be jealous, but it was a little bit different because your guy sounds like he didn't know what he was doing, right? And when I recall OFCCP in '06, they were trying to figure out the internet and resume. They didn't have it. They didn't know what those things meant. They were trying to figure it out. And one day I was really lucky, and I remember this guy's name. I don't know how I still remember it, but his name was Dave Hess, Mr. Hess, Dave Hess with the Department of Justice and OFCCP. And I would talk to him at least maybe 4 or 5 times a week, if not 10 or 15. And literally from this span of time, several months, we got to know each other really well. But he was really nice. When he didn't know the answer to something or there was any confusion or gray area, he would go get clarification for me. And whatever would come up, and I'd reach out to him for a client, whether it was for our team to know how to respond to a question or if there was a notice that came out, like, what did that mean? He was phenomenal. And again, Dave Hess, this was almost 20 years from today. So in all that time, I feel really lucky that I was able to tap into him. And he was somebody who was a great resource for a time.
And I always want to be very cognizant of time, but we're going to close out. I want you to tell everybody what you're doing now and how you can help move the talent needle, as I like to say, forward. But what were people getting wrong in the early stages? And where do you think we need help when it comes to the diversity issue? Because I've had a couple, when I was heads of TA, I had 2 of them come in, and one person was a consultant, and she was genius and insightful. And she had this gift about how to anchor concepts. And it happened that she was talking about diversity. I'm very confident that whatever topic she was speaking about, she could anchor that concept so that it would always be remembered in people's minds. And then the other joker that I had, it was nothing about numbers. It was that everything we were doing was broken. I'm here to save you. So he wasn't a team player. And whether it was because of he just didn't fit. And so what did you see we were getting wrong? But what are the things, you could pick either one, that we need to be doing better or some ideas to get better when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it is a critical part. And last comment is, I've always thought the famous patent quote, we've said it on here a bunch of times, which is, if everybody's thinking alike, nobody's thinking. And so thought leadership and thought diversity, tell us from your viewpoint, what were we getting wrong? What are we improving on? And where should we be going?
Yeah, so I don't think a lot has changed in what we're getting wrong, George. So let me start off by first thing, that consultant that came in or the new person. I'd like to think that I'm able to solve a lot of my clients' problems, come in and potentially let them sleep better at night. But through these years, I've figured out and I've cautioned, hey, if myself or anyone else comes in and says that we're going to solve all your problems and we're going to do it all in like 30 days, head for the hills, right? Because humans and human capital is ever changing. And if we can help you create a strategy to help react and pivot quicker, that's great. But to solve all your problems, I think is a leap that we're never actually going to get there. The better we get, the more we'll still have to do, right? So a little bit of that. And what you said reminded me of a story that I heard over the weekend. We were talking to someone in regards to investing in stocks. The person that we were trying to talk into investing his money told us the story how he recently, his kids who are grown kids, they're like in their 20s, talked him into investing some money. So he begrudgingly invested a few $100s and the stocks went down like 50%. And so he's sworn never to invest in stocks ever again. So how can you say that if you're trying to get to a retirement age, you're going to need to have a very diversified, unless somebody comes out with like the tip of the century, you need to diversify your investments and plan for retirement in a certain way. And it's a commitment. That's what I think is the biggest difference between the companies that are successful with diversity versus those that are not. The ones that are struggling, the ones that are not maybe doing it the way that they should do it. I was with GE, and when Jack Welch was there, and even today, the foundation of all they do and the reason why they've been around for so long is their commitment to diversity. You look at Apple, you look at Walmart, you look at all these others, whether it's Silicon Valley or whatnot. These companies that continue to grow and flourish, they understand that diversity is an integral part. Is it perfect? No, but they are continuing to make whatever strides they need to make improvements and to do whatever they need. And as far as talent acquisition is concerned, George, this commitment is truly going to separate companies even further as we move on, because with the talent pool being so small or shrinking, if you don't have a diversity strategy, you are pretty much cutting off 40% of the talent pool from your potential pipeline. And how many companies can really truly afford to ignore 40% of your talent pool? And as we continue to move forward, there's going to be the time where that impending time where the cumulative number of diverse people, those with disabilities, cultural backgrounds, right, et cetera, those numbers are going to exceed those that do not fall under diversity, right? So when we get there, you're really putting yourself behind the 8 ball if you do not have a strategy. And to have that strategy is not where you stop. You need to be committed and have that commitment moving forward after that as well.
So I'm always really, really careful because, the people we've had on here, including you, it's very easy to get into the mechanics and the weeds, talent acquisition. But if you were to be speaking to what I call level 1 C-suite and level 2, what are your best 3 tips for making sure that you drive a commitment to diversity, but that you create a culture of diversity and diversity of thought, experiences, abilities, perspectives? What are the top 3 things that when you consult, you want to anchor into people?
Yeah. So George, great question. And I've got a lot to say about that, all those things, right? But I try to focus on my expertise, and that is talent and attracting talent, recruiting talent. And the first thing that you need to do is really define what diversity means to your organization. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a room or a Zoom and I tell companies that, and they usually the individuals either roll their eyes or they say, hey, diversity is diversity. I'm like, well, that's great. Well, here's an example. Are you here to tell me that Bank of America's definition of diversity is the same definition as Limited Brands' definition of diversity, right? Limited Brands in Columbus, Ohio is 92% female, right? Versus another company that is probably the opposite. They're probably 85% male, right? So we need to define what diversity means to each organization, because not only will it be different for each, sure, there'll be similarities, or you can find an organization out of all the companies that mirror each other, but not only are you going to have a different definition, but you might have differences within your company in different departments, different locations as well, right? So we want to have racial choices or definitions, socioeconomic, people with disabilities, our friends in LGBTQ, and veterans and their family, active military veterans and their family members. The list goes on, right? And what else is there out there that I haven't even known or that can be to add to that diversity conversation? So again, define. And getting into all the consultant speak, you can't even measure success until you define what you're trying to do. So That's number one. And the second, truly, some low hanging opportunities. Whatever you're doing, try to talk about what you can do different. If you've always to the same pond and you've gone fishing and fished for catfish, but all of a sudden you want bass and you're trying to go to that same pond and find some bass, find some other water, right? Let's just do something different. I mean, think how simple that can possibly be. But we talked about the resistance to adopting something new, adopting technology, adopting another resource. So all those things are in play, but that could be something that's you could do without me coming in to tell you what to do. I like those as a great start. And gosh, our educational system is the greatest in the world. And I love to talk about HBCUs. And there's probably one close to you somewhere. And not just HBCUs, but there's still other colleges, universities, community colleges, etc., that have affiliations with other groups as well that you can tap into. And not only can you tap into, but if you have any questions or any desires to learn other new resources or get some feedback and advice, I will bet my right arm that they'd be willing to give you some advice and some insight on what they think they can get you off the ground, maybe give you a little bit different perspective.
So I want to close out, and there's two questions. They're pretty easy, but the first one is, so you mentioned earlier you broke into your own business. So what is it you're doing now? What are you helping companies do now?
Yeah, thanks, George. We're having a great conversation. I totally forgot about that. So I started my company, HamiltonDemo, with my business partner, and we do executive search, professional placement, any recruiting projects and consulting. And truly, George, we've done everything from hourly all the way to the boardroom, both for-profit and nonprofits. I do a lot of nonprofit work here in Cincinnati. I sit on several boards over the past 15 years. It's a work of joy to help out the nonprofits as well as other for-profit organizations. I will tell you that when we started with my network of enterprise contacts, those Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, I thought we would do most of our business through them, but it's been a pleasant surprise to see how we've been able to serve small and medium-sized businesses too. So we're really the full gamut, and we have some phenomenal strategic partners that we work with. So if there's ever a need to bring in some other knowledge from somewhere else, we've got that already lined up where there's organizations and strategic partners that can help us out. We collaborate with quite a few organizations. So you can find us at HamiltonDemo.com. My phone number and email are on the site, and always happy to answer any questions. We welcome any inquiries, any questions, happy to chat and see what comes of it. So yeah, we just finished our 4th year. I will say this, George, if you would have told me that there was going to be a pandemic, I may have held off, but it has still been a phenomenal ride. We've enjoyed it, and we're looking forward to continuing our growth in year 5.
Wow, that's great. So I'm going to give you the question to close out, and I don't send this in advance. It's not hard. It's not a gotcha.
Yeah, married, 3 kids, 3 cars. I love long walks on the beach.
Mai Tais in the rain. Mai Tais.
Is that what you were going to ask?
Pina coladas in the rain. No, so
Mai Tais in the rain. Yeah,
you've had a great career from immigrating from Haiti, New York, Ohio, and I certainly don't ask people their ages, but you've been on the enterprise side. You're now running your own business, and so if you were to go back and tell your 20, 21, 22-year-old self 2 or 3 pieces of advice that would have made your career easier, better, smoother, more successful, you get the last word, man. What are the things that you'd go back and tell your younger self?
Holy cow. So I hope my father is not listening to this, because one of the things would be that I would have listened to my parents more. So yeah, my parents were really hardworking people. They did well. And I, just like any other teenager, early 20s, thought I knew it all, right? So probably would have listened to them more, number one. Number two, I would have sought out more mentorship and coaching, right? So when I look back, I've had the opportunity to come across some great leaders, some people that took me under their wing. And gosh, if I would have done that or sought that out after high school or while in college, I think it's just the sense of abundance and the sense of just kind of the world is my oyster. And you're young, you don't know what's ahead of you, right? If I had that type, a little bit more guidance and coaching, gosh, things could have accelerated for me and for others, right? So, and when I look back, I look at some of my friends and other classmates who had some of that, and they were struggling with it at first, but it paid off for them. And we didn't really understand that it was coaching or mentorship back then. But yeah, I would have done that. And I've had such a great career in my experiences. If I could have understood that being in business for myself is really where my sweet spot was, learn to accelerate my learning and my knowledge would have been greatly beneficial as well. So I could have gotten here.
Yeah, and impact more. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the Talent War podcast. And, folks, you can find this anywhere.
So you will bleep out the part that I said, George, you will bleep out the part that I said I'd listen to my parents more, right? Because I don't want my dad to hold that over my head.
I just used that. I was giving a speech in Vegas Friday, and I said something to the effect of, when I was a kid, my dad was a moron. And now that I'm a dad, and now our listeners know my 29, shortly to be 30-year-old daughter has given me my first grandson, I realized just how wise my old man was. And somebody pointed out that Mark Twain said something like that. And I was like, well, that just proves I should have been reading and listening more in high school. So that's something I'd add to my list. But no, I want to give our parents due credit. DNA, it's the lessons. And, they give you those lessons. But I think to your point that it's always better that we recognize those lessons or use those good words as early as we can. But it's never too late to put into use those lessons. And I've learned to deliver them to my kids, but I can't thank you enough for coming on the Talent War podcast. I wish you the greatest success, abundance, joy, and all you're doing, and more than anything else, impacting. Because when it comes to diversity, when it comes to talent, what people forget, and I think you made an excellent point, which is, and I'm going to say it in a different way, there's this 40% of the population that you may not be reaching, but your customer base, your consumer base, the people that you work with, that you interact, your vendors, your clients, your customers, the general public, that's all changing. And your lack of ability to reflect back that you're part of that same community, that you have the kind of thought and experiences to the groups that you're selling and marketing to. If you don't have that, you're at a distinct disadvantage from a talent perspective. And you develop software, you develop a product, you develop a service, you develop a restaurant. If you don't have people thinking, hey, the best idea wins, what do we put in here? You're behind the power curve. So your words of advice, your words of wisdom, immensely helpful. I'm very grateful. I think we probably ought to do this again and get into the mechanics of diversity.
Yeah, I would love to.
We will do that. Thank you, brother, for being on and being a great guest and tolerating my kind of off-the-cuff question methodology.
No, it was a pleasure, my friend. I'll look forward to doing it again.
All right. Have a good one, and we will talk again soon. And the Talent War podcast for today, we are out. And thank you for listening to the Talent War podcast, where we discuss all things talent, focusing on a talent mindset, the core belief that the only true competitive advantage you can hope to achieve and maintain is your talent. Join us for the next episode of the Talent War podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you heard, subscribe and please leave a review. Connect with me on Talent War Group's LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram accounts, and send your comments and inquiries to media@talentwargroup.com. The Talent War podcast is brought to you by the Talent War Group, management, consulting, and executive search firm. We work with you, bringing services like talent acquisition, leadership development, executive search, executive coaching, seminars, speaking engagements, all to create talent solutions for your most pressing business problems. To get started, visit us at www.talentwargroup.com.